This is Operating Rails. This talk is both kind of an introduction to deployment and operations for new developers, but it's also a framework for thinking about deploying and operating web applications that I have been sort of like slowly chipping away at for myself over 20 years of deploying Rails apps. Like what needs to be covered when your app goes to production for the first time? What needs to be covered when your app goes to production for the 1000th time? Like that's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night, I guess. That's a little embarrassing to admit. So before we get into the details, I'll introduce myself. I'm André Arko. I'm better known as Indirect on the internet. My biggest Ruby claim to fame is leading the Bundler and Ruby Gems open source teams for the last 15 years or so, followed by a more recent project to create a community gem server at gem.coop. I built my first Rails application in 2004, and trying to get that application off of my laptop so that other people could see it and use it is what started me down this path of madness and DevOps and etc. It's been a really long journey. I've learned a lot of things from watching Rails apps break in production for 20 years. But let's start with kind of like the scene of someone that you know who is possibly also you. There's an excited Ruby developer. They follow a Rails tutorial. They make a blog. They make a to-do app. I don't know. They make something cool. They walk through the code, they walk through the tests, they finish the tutorial, they have a full Rails application that is very cool. Rails is amazing, it was so fast. And then they realize that it's just on their laptop and they can't actually show this to anyone. And so the most useful Rails tutorials will say, hosting options, maybe you should look at Heroku or Fly.io or Render or Railway or DigitalOcean or whatever. If they're an unhelpful new Rails developer tutorial, they might tell you to go look at AWS or Google Cloud or Azure or something. But no matter what they suggest, now this hypothetical Rails developer needs to find a new tutorial that they now have to start over again about. And this is a problem because all of those tutorials say things like, of course, this is just a basic tutorial and an introduction and doesn't include anything about how to secure your critical production data in real production environments. And hosting tutorials are just like, oh, you have a site live on our service. You can give us money now, and that's all we really cared about. Thanks. And so frankly, I'm not really sure how these hosting companies expect the people who just tried their tutorial to ever learn these skills that they say, oh, we just skipped over all that stuff. But I am going to try and kind of like set up a framework for how to think about and learn those skills in this talk. So let's say you followed a hosting tutorial, you have a shiny new application and probably also a database on Heroku or Fly.io or whatever. And now is when the actual real serious problems that this talk is about all start. Are your secrets secure? Is your database backed up? What happens if there's an exception in your Ruby code? How do you debug something that is only happening 1,000 miles away on a server that you don't actually know how to look at? So I will not actively try to answer every possible production concern or question in this talk because that would take way, way, way too long. But I'm trying to kind of establish a framework for talking about these concerns and provide some illustrative examples and then give all of you a way to both think about and talk about with your peers, kind of like a what is that called? Like a landscape of ways of thinking about best practices for production environments. Landscape was the word I was looking for. So way up at the top, the goal is thinking about everything in production from a lens of confidence, your team's confidence, your users' confidence. It's not like, this is absolutely a spectrum. This is not a black and white situation, right? It's like, are you mostly up? Are you very consistently up? Are you basically up all the time? Do people think, oh yeah, that's very reliable and stable? Do they think, oh, that's Twitter throwing fail whales every 10 minutes? Like, that's the kind of like range that you're working with. And what you're looking for is like pushing both yourself and your teams and your users' confidence in that kind of like higher confidence direction using these tools. So the categories that I suggest using within kind of like overall confidence in the service to evaluate things as you're, kind of like making decisions around them, or, should we merge this? Should we ship this? These are the categories that I have found feel like to me, the best ones, and I would like you to tell me afterwards if you don't like these categories or if you think I should change them, because my goal here is to like have us all talk about this more. So my categories are errors, data, speed, security, and lead time. Lead time is the amount of time that it takes for a commit to be created from when it's created to when it is live in production. That amount of time, keeping track of it and actively trying to make it shorter, means that you can try a change, learn if it worked, try another change, learn if it worked, and the faster and smaller you can make that lead time, the faster your reactions are, the faster you learn, and it's like a flywheel where the faster you make it, the faster you're able to act. So we'll talk about lead time more at the end, but for the time being, let's start with errors. So conceptually, an error is any time something goes wrong. A user isn't able to use your site, you aren't able to operate your site in some way. Could mean your Ruby code threw an error, could mean some configuration means that your app doesn't actually work even though it's up. Could mean your server has completely exploded and there is nothing for any of your users to talk to. So with that in mind, how will you know if any of these things happened? Like, do you just wait for one of your users who happens to have your phone number to be like, hey, I can't talk to your app? Like, what's the plan here? So that's the thing that we're gonna like look at under errors. So it's not super common deployment advice, but I think one of the most important ways to build confidence in your application itself is to test it. Test it manually, test it automatically, write tests for it, ask other people to test it. Testing it in advance will save you more time debugging later than you can imagine right now. Like, speaking from personal experience as someone who's like, do we really need to write all of these tests first? Yes, you really need to write all of these tests first. The next, maybe most popular way to increase confidence before a deploy is another environment that isn't production. And you can put the code that may or may not work there and make sure that it works. Hopefully make sure that it works. So that's usually called staging. The main area is usually called production. Rails has built-in support for both staging and production. I definitely recommend taking advantage of that built-in support. Once you have used staging to increase your confidence, that is when you can promote it to production. Some platforms even let you bump staging directly to production without having to like do a full deploy. They like save the artifact, and you can say, please also, ship that artifact into production. That can sometimes be nice if you have, like if you want to be able to get your production, if you want to get the staging thing that you have now tested into production very quickly, that can be handy and nice. After you're releasing code with those manual and automatic tests and then staging and then production, the next most common error mitigation strategy is exception reporting and uptime monitoring. Like, does exactly what it sounds like. Sends you a report when there's an exception. Uptime monitoring is, tell some server somewhere to make requests to your server and complain to you if the requests ever fail. That's also very useful. I suggest starting with honeybadger.io or sentry.io for exception tracking and uptime monitoring. They are both free for a single user, which is great if you have a project. It's very nice to just be able to set up free exception tracking and uptime monitoring. Personally, what I do is I connect the Slack integration from Honeybadger or Sentry into like a Slack where I just shove all of my like personal side projects, and then I get a Slack notification when something goes wrong, which is like the laziest person's possible PagerDuty, I guess. If you're a real team, you probably actually want PagerDuty, but like that's a whole lot of hassle and cost and setup that I don't really think makes sense if it's just like something that you're doing for yourself or your friends. For anything that's less significant than an actual exception, or to help you investigate when there is an exception, you'll also want to think about what usually gets called instrumentation or observability. And there are tons and tons of buzzwords that you can research and read about, but I'm going to basically over summarize all of that and just say, that means there's some logs and you should look at the logs. And then that means there's some metrics and you can keep track of metrics, which means counters. It's numbers. You add things to the numbers and then you look at them later. It's very good. Monitoring that focuses on metrics mostly includes the Prometheus open source tool, Datadog, AppSignal, New Relic, companies like that. And then traces is the third part of observability. We're getting all the pillars in. Traces let you keep track of how long each part of what your application did took and see how like they nested into each other. So that's like additional HTTP requests, database queries, talking to Redis, background jobs, all that stuff in like a investigatable, traceable track. If you've ever heard of OpenTelemetry, that's what this is about. Honeycomb.io is the pioneer of this style of monitoring, but Sentry and Datadog have also added the ability to collect and review traces. They basically all use this OpenTelemetry framework as the way to create the traces, and that has things that plug directly into Rails. I don't always find Honeycomb's like traces. Honeycomb actively says you can't send us logs, you can't send us metrics, you can only send us events, and we create traces from those events, and that is the only thing that we provide at all. And so sometimes I have the experience of trying to investigate something in Honeycomb and being like, actually, I just wish I could see the logs from this. And then I will go look at my hosting provider's logs. But traces are really powerful in that I regularly had the experience of solving something via the like more informative stacked nested trace with all of the individual attributes of what was going on that I just would never have been able to figure out from looking at the logs. So I'm really glad that Honeycomb exists as an option for all of us now to use. And I definitely recommend checking it out if you have not tried it before. Lastly, on the topic of errors in production, the sort of open-ended question you need to ask yourself is, how will people tell me about problems? Do you have a contact form? Do you have a support email? Do you have a social media profile? Do you just like hand out your phone number on every page on your website? I don't recommend that, but you could do it. Make sure that there's some way to hear from your users, because there will always be something that does not trigger your monitoring, that does not show up in your exception reports, that will still be broken, and you will still need to fix it. And you need to make sure that you can hear about it if you want to be able to do that. Next big category is data. Data includes not just the stuff that users have uploaded or typed directly into a form. It also includes uploaded files. It includes anything that your application has generated. It includes anything that you would want while recovering from a catastrophic failure, right? Server failures range from the extremely mundane, the motherboard died, to the extremely surprising, what do you mean a truck rammed into the data center's power transformer and our entire DC is gone? But they all have the same end state, which is you no longer have a server. And if you no longer have a server, that means you need to set everything up again. And this is maybe the touchiest part of running a production service. Like, do you have a copy of the latest code? Do you have a copy of a recent database backup? Do you have uploaded files saved somewhere you can still get to them after that truck hit that power transformer or whatever happened? So start with the code. Make sure, I very, very strongly recommend making sure that all of your deploys actually go through a hosting situation rather than coming from any of the machines that you or your code developers are working from. Most often, most easily, I guess, that means like GitHub and a deploy from GitHub Actions, but like there is a huge number of ways to set up your CI system to also be a CD system. But the important aspect of this that I'm trying to get at is make sure that your code is going to production from somewhere that you can do that again later if the server is now gone. Next, the database. So use a system, please. For me, use a system that takes snapshots of your database, or build something that takes snapshots. So like for my side projects where kind of like a real serious snapshot situation feels like overkill, I have written a daily cron GitHub action that slurps out the production database, sticks it in a SQL file, and sets it in a GitHub action artifact. Those expire after 90 days, so I have exactly 90 days of daily backups, and it's great. If you are more serious, you use Heroku's hosted database service, or you use RDS on Amazon, and you like check the correct boxes to make sure that you got snapshots and rotated backups and dailies and weeklies and whatever. I definitely recommend that you do this for some doesn't have anything to do with my past experience of database data disappearing. Don't, no. Speaking of that, untested backups aren't real. More than one startup has actively stopped existing when they went to restore their backups that they talked up proudly and discovered that they did not actually exist. It really sucks. I have more than one backup, preferably have like one backup per day so that if something has gone horribly wrong, you can be like, when did this happen? I see, it happened 3 days ago. Well, at least we can go from there. But test your backups. That's, the second also most important rule of running applications in production. Once you have your databases taken care of, make sure that you're also covering user uploaded or created files, right? If you're using a service from a big cloud provider like an S3, B2, R2, Google Cloud Storage, that can be a huge advantage here because those services all provide as like a basic promise, we will put your file in 3 places that are not in the same physical location. If you aren't using one of those services, I've sometimes seen, maybe the most common reason I've seen for this is on a host like Render that's fully container-based. Maybe they say, oh, you can just run Minio in a container with like a persistent volume and you don't need a whole S3. Like that's a lot of accounts to set up. And that is true. It is a lot of accounts to set up. And also, if the server with the Minio container on it gets hit by a truck, those files are now gone. I'm sorry. Like, I don't recommend doing that unless you're really sure that those files don't actually for real matter. Sort of like winding down the data part of things, you also now need to think about how you're going to deal with all of the existing production data. Once you have a real application in real production, there's more and more data over time, and you can't fix your awkward, weird schema thing that just happened that you aren't really sure what happened by like nuking the database and reloading the schema, because then your users will all be mad that their accounts are now gone. So now that you have a live production database, migrations are hard, and I'm sorry, like this is the price of having actual users and having actual data. So in particular, I want to call out adding, removing, and renaming database columns as all actions that can now just take your entire application offline if you just do them the way you're used to doing them in development. To avoid kind of like a full period of downtime while doing this, you need to deploy code that can handle the old schema and the new schema, and then you need to deploy to run the schema migration, and then you need to remove the handles both cases code, and then you need to deploy a third time, and then your migration is done. So I strongly recommend the strong migrations gem as a way to kind of like stop yourself from doing this wrong out of habit. But whether you use the strong migrations gem or not, please think about the fact that migrating things is going to require active effort from you that it never did in development before, and that will make it harder to break either the site or your users' data, which is what I am trying to recommend here. The next part, speed. So speed from a Rails app, I swear it is actually possible. In my experience, the biggest reasons that Rails apps get slow are external API calls, responses with no pagination, and accidental database queries that are like 1 per record, or God knows how many per record, right? But n+1s. Rails may not be kind of like in raw the most performant framework in the world, but it can be like perfectly serviceable and fast enough for actual applications if you avoid those kind of like big time sink traps in your application. So why does the speed of your application matter? And as I was kind of like leading up to from the beginning, it comes down to confidence. Speed is actually very important for user confidence, even if it is not necessarily important for your own or your team's confidence. If users can see what's happening, if it's happening quickly, they trust your app is working correctly. If your app just mysteriously stalls out and provides no feedback, users don't know what's happening, like, right? They don't have confidence that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing if they're just staring at nothing happening. If users lose interest or they get distracted, like you're losing the confidence of your users, whatever did happen with that thing that I was trying to, I don't know. Maybe it's like the 10th tab back there. Maybe I can find it again eventually. Not sure. Um, Use the monitoring and observability tools that we already talked about to keep an eye on how long your application takes to do things. Like, don't use averages because averages are not real and don't reflect any literal users, but track percentiles that reflect how many users you can tolerate having that bad of an experience. So, for example, if you have 10 users per day, maybe you only need to watch the 90th percentile performance because only one person per day is having a worse experience than the 90th percentile. On the other hand, maybe you have 10 million users per day, so you want to track the 99.999th percentile because that's still like 1,000 people every day having a worse experience than the thing that you're tracking. So this actually requires some thought. I'm sorry, but it can be incredibly helpful to genuinely have an idea of what the experience is of the people that are using your application by saying, yes, this is how many people are having this bad of an experience. When you find something that's slow, your main tools to fight against it are monitoring and profiling. Monitoring, which the observability stuff that we discussed before, can tell you which users experience the slowness, can tell you what they were trying to do, might even be able to tell you which SQL queries or which HTTP calls made things so slow. Meanwhile, profiling is how you find out what was slow about the actual code that was running in that given application, how you optimize it. There's a rack profiler gem that's the most well-known profiler, but there's multiple options available to figure out why your Ruby code might be slow. In my experience, it is almost always nested loops that people didn't really think about how many items were going to be in each of the loops if it's really, really slow Ruby code. But there are many possible reasons. That's why profilers are good. Finally, outside of optimizing your Ruby code or paying for gigantic servers that go very fast, I strongly recommend using a content delivery network like Fastly or Cloudflare to serve content that doesn't need to be actively dynamically generated for every request. If you have images, if you have downloads, if you have pages that are shared across all of the users who are looking at them, you can generate them and hand them off to the CDN, and then the CDN can make sure that no matter where your users are in the world, they still get copies of those things quickly. This especially hit home for me when traveling to conferences and talking to other developers about their experience of using, for example, Ruby gems, and being like, oh, I see. You run bundle install, and then you go to get a cup of coffee that you might finish before the bundle install completes. I will need to look into this. This is a great reason to have a CDN that moves the static files closer to those end users. Next up, security. Now that you know how and why to keep your app fast, let's look at security. There are basically two resources that any Rails production application has that you have signed yourself up to defend. Again, I'm sorry, but you have done it. It's just true. So the two resources are your user data and the servers themselves, which can execute code, hopefully on behalf of you and your users, but also potentially on behalf of other people, but on your credit card. So one class of attacks is breaking into your application, steal user data, get emails, phone numbers, maybe credit cards. God, I hope not credit cards. Everybody uses Stripe or something by now, right? Yeah, no credit cards. Sorry, checker. The other type of attack is about hijacking your server to do something for the attacker, but on your bill, send spam, show ads, mine cryptocurrency, something. So the best defense for data is to not store it. Again, I'm sorry, checker. I understand that this is not an option for you, but if you can get away with it, don't store user data. Then there isn't anything to be lost, and that's great. If your users are providing personal information, especially financial or identity information, please, please, please make sure that that data is encrypted inside the database. So someone just simply dumping the database and running away with it does not mean that they have actually learned all of those private details. It's not actually hard to encrypt by column in an active model record anymore. Please do that. It's very good. The best defense against attackers who want to hijack your servers is updating your libraries. using a tool like Dependabot or Renovate to apply security fixes, making sure your application isn't vulnerable to known hacks or vulnerabilities, keeping API tokens not stored in plain text, using a secret store. Like most hosting providers have some kind of like, we keep your secrets encrypted if you give them to us over here, and then we'll like shove them in your app at the last second. Use that thing. Definitely use that thing. Set up monitoring alerts on your servers like CPU and disk usage. Set up a billing alert so that if something suddenly happens, they will say, hey, that's weird. Did you actually mean to use 10 times as much compute as you did last month? This is a very good plan. I'm not speaking from, okay, I am actually speaking from personal experience here. It's a really good plan. Ultimately, it's also always worth it to have a security policy, even if it's really simple. Like, just here's some contact information. If you find a security issue, puts you literally ahead of 90% of all web applications. If you're a bigger team, maybe you want to have like dedicated security people in a HackerOne program, but like you can have a basic awareness of what could go wrong and how you could possibly handle it. And knowing that you have backups that can't be deleted by someone hacking into your server, like you are already so far ahead of most people that like that's a huge advantage. Lastly, kind of setting up lead time, there is a research project called DORA, which stands for DevOps Research and Assessment, and they have been investigating how teams at companies ship software to production and operate it with minimal errors for many years. They were originally associated with the Puppet configuration management tool and company, and nowadays they are housed within the Google Cloud division. I don't know what the right word is. Anyway, and the book Accelerate, which was written by the founders of DORA, goes into much more depth than I can fit here. So I'm just going to focus on one thing that I find really helpful. And if you want to know more about all of this, I strongly recommend checking out dora.dev and the book titled Accelerate. So the aspect I want to focus on briefly is lead time, which is one of the 4 core metrics in DORA's research. That's the amount of time it takes, as I said, to go from committing something to it being live in production. And if you can make that fast, like if it takes minutes or hours, you will have a completely different experience as a developer than if your lead time is measured in like days, weeks, God forbid, months. And the DORA project found that small lead times is one of the biggest predictors of software projects and teams being successful. Like successful in the sense that they ship things to production and the things that they ship to production actually work instead of needing to be rolled back. So the main finding of the DORA research project is that the conventional wisdom of all of the managers and executives that you have ever heard before is that going slowly and carefully is exactly backwards for the desired outcome of things not being broken after you push them. The teams and projects with the least errors and rollbacks are the teams that deploy the fastest and most frequently, so that if something goes wrong, they can immediately fix it and then it's fixed right away. If you're already operating a larger or slower application in production, the biggest advice that I have is to reduce the size of each change so that you can make rolling out each of those changes faster and faster and faster to try and pursue this hypothetical amazing goal of very fast, very small changes. At the beginning of your project is absolutely the best time to set this up, standard automations, right? Set up completely automated testing, set up completely automated deployment if the tests pass, use GitHub Actions and some modern hosting platforms, and you can say, I have clicked 5 things and now my pushes are tested and deployed to production in less than 5 minutes. That is the best starting point that I can possibly recommend, especially if you are planning to build a bigger application with a larger team later. Having this already set up is absolutely fantastic. So now that I've filled your heads with more ideas than you can probably remember, although if you want to refer back to this, I will also post it to my blog. The big concerns, right? The overall strategy is thinking about how whatever you're going to do is going to impact these categories: errors, data, speed, security, and lead time. Will the change impact your ability to monitor errors? Will it improve or make worse your ability to back up user data? Will it make your application more secure or less secure? will make it possible for you to ship changes more quickly. By keeping these categories of concern in mind, you're already better prepared to operate a production and deployment than like the vast majority of Rails developers. And if the thought of all of the things that I just mentioned is interesting or exciting to you, you probably have a bright future in DevOps. And if the thought of working with all of these things makes you feel unspeakable dread, I recommend sticking to teams where the DevOps is someone else's problem, honestly. If your team could use a boost while handling all of the stuff that we just talked about, I work for Spinel Cooperative with developers from the core teams of Rails, Hotwire, RubyGems, Bundler, and more. We would be super happy to give your team the advantage of having spent 20 years building all of this stuff. Come say hi to me after the talk or check out our website at spinel.coop. In the end, will listening to all of the advice in this talk mean your app never goes down? No, I'm sorry, it won't. Downtime is something that comes for us all, and it usually includes some aspect that is completely unexpected or completely outside of our control. Instead, this advice is about making you prepared. You'll be prepared to recover from downtime. You'll be prepared to add additional protections that correspond to your challenges. And that's really what all of this strategy is about. And ultimately, that's the best any of us can do. So I wish all of you good luck with your future deployments.